Imagine you are living a life that feels like it has been painted in shades of grey. Every day is a repetition of the same polite, submissive gestures dictated by a family that views your every move through the lens of social standing and propriety. This is the life of Valancy Stirling. At 29 years old, Valancy is considered a failure by her family in the small, suffocating town of Deerwood. To her mother and her aunts, she is just Doss, a plain, quiet, unmarried woman who has failed to meet the expectations of her station. She spends her days performing the role they've written for her, but inside she has built a secret refuge. She calls it the Blue Castle. It is a vivid, romantic and wild place in her mind where she is free to be whoever she wants to be. It is the only place where she feels truly alive. Valancy's life is defined by a quiet, constant fear. There is the fear of her family's judgment, which feels heavy and inescapable, and there is a physical fear, a recurring, terrifying fluttering in her heart that she keeps to herself. Seeking some clarity about these palpitations, she visits a doctor, Dr. Trent. What follows is the most significant moment of her life, though it begins as a catastrophe. The doctor delivers a devastating diagnosis. Valancy has a fatal, advanced heart condition. He tells her she has perhaps a year to live. For most people, a death sentence brings only despair, but for Valancy, it acts as a strange, sudden liberation. The fear that has governed her life, the fear of what people think, the fear of being an old maid, the fear of social disgrace, suddenly vanishes. If she is going to die, why should she spend her remaining months being the compliant, quiet Doss? This realization triggers a radical metamorphosis. Valancy decides to keep her diagnosis a secret, knowing that if her family found out, they would use their care to smother her remaining autonomy, turning her final days into a prison of pity and control. She begins to shed her old identity like a heavy, ill-fitting coat. She becomes blunt. She becomes honest. She starts to mock the hypocrisy of the Stirling family, particularly during a tense, unforgettable dinner where she refuses to play the part of the submissive daughter. She stops caring about the Stirling code of what is respectable and begins to look for what is real. This new, fierce version of Valancy eventually leads her to leave the stifling walls of her family home entirely. She seeks out a life that is rugged and unvarnished, and she finds it by becoming a housekeeper for Sissy Gay. Sissy is a social outcast, a woman living on the fringes of Deerwood, and she is dying of consumption. In this environment, far from the judgmental eyes of the town's elite, Valancy discovers a sense of purpose she never knew she possessed. She meets roaring Abel, a boisterous, larger-than-life carpenter, and she meets Barney Snaith. Barney is a man who lives on the edge of society, a rugged and mysterious figure who doesn't fit into the neat categories of Deerwood. As Valancy spends more time with him, she finds herself falling in love. It is a connection built on authenticity rather than social performance. For the first time, Valancy isn't being loved because she is a suitable match, but because of who she actually is. She eventually marries Barney in a simple, unconventional ceremony, choosing a life of uncertainty and genuine passion over a life of comfortable, hollow respectability. But the novel takes a sharp, unexpected turn that challenges everything Valancy has just gained. After a terrifying accident at a train station where Valancy experiences a near-death experience, she is forced to confront the reality of her health. It turns out that Dr. Trent made a catastrophic medical error. He had accidentally given Valancy a letter intended for a different terminal patient. Valancy isn't dying, she is physically healthy. This revelation, which should have been a moment of joy, plunges her into a deep existential crisis. She feels as though her entire transformation was built on a lie. She fears she has tricked Barney into a marriage based on a false premise, and she worries that she has lost the true version of herself that only emerged because she thought she was facing death. As she struggles with this, another layer of the world's complexity is revealed. She discovers that Barney Snaith is not the social outcast he appears to be. He is actually Bernard Redfern, a wealthy heir to a massive fortune, who had been living under a pseudonym to escape the very pressures of high society that Valancy has just spent her life defying. He is also a celebrated author, known by the pen name John Foster. Valancy finds herself caught between two worlds. She feels a sudden urge to retreat to the safety of her old life, only to realize that her family is no better than she once thought. When they learn of her connection to Barney's potential wealth, their sudden interest in her is not born of love, but of greed. They are more interested in her connection to a fortune than her actual well-being. In the final confrontation of the story, Barney finds her. He doesn't care about the social implications or the accidental nature of their beginning. He reveals his true identity and his enduring love for her, explaining that his presence in her life was driven by a desperate fear of losing the woman he had finally found. The story concludes not with a return to the respectable life, but with a leap into the unknown. Valancy and Barney decide to leave the suffocating social structures of Deerwood behind, choosing a life of adventure and travel. The Blue Castle, once a mere mental sanctuary, becomes the reality of her spirit, a place of autonomy and joy that she carries with her into the world. When we look at the themes of the Blue Castle, a few things stand out that make it such a resonant work, even a century after it was written. First, there is the symbolism of the Blue Castle itself. It begins as a psychological necessity, a mental space where a repressed woman can escape the crushing weight of her reality. But by the end of the book, the Blue Castle is no longer just a thought, it is a way of being. It represents the sovereign space of the individual soul, the idea that true freedom is an internal state that allows you to navigate the external world on your own terms. There is also a profound exploration of appearance versus reality. Montgomery sets up a sharp contrast between the respectable members of the Stirling family and the outcasts, like Sissy Gay and Roaring Abel. The Stirlings have the status, the money, and the social standing, but their lives are hollow, governed by masks and hypocrisy. The outcasts, while living more difficult and messy lives, possess a level of authenticity that the Stirlings can only pretend to have. This theme is personified in Barney Snaith. He is the ultimate subversion of appearance. He looks like a drifter, but is actually a man of means and intellect, using his mask to find a life that is actually real. Perhaps the most striking element of the book is the irony of fate. The entire engine of the plot is driven by a medical mistake. It is a profound commentary on how much of our lives are shaped by things beyond our control, and how a perceived catastrophe can paradoxically become the very catalyst for growth. It suggests that sometimes it takes the threat of losing everything to give a person the courage to actually start living. Valancy's death sentence was actually her birth certificate. The novel also serves as a critique of social conformity. Montgomery examines the Stirling Code, the unwritten rules of propriety, marriage, and reputation that dictate how a woman should behave. Through Valancy's journey, we see how these rules act as a form of soft imprisonment. The struggle isn't just against her mother or her aunts, but against the internalized voice of society that tells her she is a failure if she doesn't conform. Finally, there is the role of nature in the story. The landscape of the novel, the rugged, unmanicured, and wild setting, mirrors Valancy's internal liberation. As she moves away from the manicured, controlled environments of the town and into the wilder spaces of Lake Mistois, her spirit expands. The natural world doesn't care about social status or marriageability, it simply is. In that wildness, Valancy finds the space to match her external reality to her internal truth. In the end, The Blue Castle is a story about the reclamation of the self. It's a reminder that the most important life we live is the one happening inside us, and that the courage to live authentically often requires us to tear down the castles we've built to hide from the world, and instead build a new one that is wide open to the wind and the light.